Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Sermon number 1. This sermon, Imam Ali mentions the genesis of creation of the heavens, earth, and Adam. Glory to Allah in the highest, whose glorification cannot be described in words, whose blessings and bounties cannot be enumerated by reckoners and enumerators, and homage due to him cannot be paid even by the most assiduous and persevering attempters. No one can fully understand or explain his being, however hard he may try. Reason and sagacity cannot visualize him. Intelligence, understanding, and attainment cannot attain the depth of knowledge to study or scrutinize the Godhead. Human faculties of conception, perception and learning, and attributes of volition, intuition, and apprehension cannot perceive him or fathom the extent of his might and glory. His attributes cannot be defined, limited, or circumscribed. There do not exist words in any language to specify or define his qualities, peculiarities, characteristics, and singularities. He is eternal. Therefore, no time could be imagined to say that he existed since then. Similarly, no period could be assigned for the duration of his existence. The creation of the universe, the universal expansion of primordial gas, and its gradual solidification in the form of mountains, acting as pegs in the bosom of earth, are all due merely to his omnipotence. The first step of religion is to accept, understand, and realize him as the Lord. Thorough understanding lies in conviction and confirmation, and the right conviction is to sincerely believe that there is no God but He. The true belief in His oneness is to realize that He is so absolutely pure and above nature that nothing can be added to or subtracted from Him, because one should realize that there is no difference between His person and His attributes. Whoever accepts His attributes to be an addition to His being abandons the concept of monotheism and believes in duality, He and His attributes. Such a person, in fact, believes Him to exist in parts. One who holds such a belief cannot form a true concept of Allah. He is ignorant and will always try to believe in some creation of his imagination as his God. And whoever holds such a belief accepts limitations in his being and confines him to a place or to particular attributes and brings him on a level with his creatures. To believe that he is invested with the characteristic of residing in a particular place, heaven or earth, and to point towards him accordingly, or to believe that he is restricted to a special position or occasion, that is to localize him, or to consider that certain place or time can exist without him and can be void of his omniscience and omnipresence, is a conception which results in assigning Godhead to a numerical unity. To assign a place to him by considering him within or over a place means to subject him to the limitations of space and to allot him an importance secondary to space. It also means to believe that some place can exist outside this affair of his omnipresence. His existence is eternal. He neither came into being at some period of time, nor was he created. His being did not come into existence from non-entity. He is with everything, but not physically and bodily. He is away from everything, but not by way of bodily distance, or of being unconcerned and indifferent to it. He acts and works, but his action or work does not require any movement or help of any parts of body, instruments or machinery. He had vision, even when there was nothing to see. He is one and alone, because he has no companion who would keep his company, or whose absence he would miss. He originated the creation without passing through any anxiety, and without first trying experiments and benefiting by the results, or improving the models, and without finding himself obliged to move about, forced to carefully work out a particular plan or line of action. Allah, the Almighty, destined things, that is matter and energy, to be dissolved into time. He so arranged and consolidated these factors, matter, time and space, that the intensity of their diverse and opposing properties was reduced. As soon as things came into existence, they were allotted properties and place in nature. And soon after creation of things, order for expansion and extension was given. And just as things were obeying this order, each one of them was given a form and a body. Thus, every created thing, from the cosmic ray down to the most complicated form of life, and every object had a place permanently fixed, was assigned a position in nature which no one can change. In this arrangement, there was nothing accidental, but everything had a prearranged and predestined place in nature. Allah knew the very details of everything before he brought each of them into existence. His knowledge covered the near and distant effects of the coming into being, evolution and destruction of everything which was created. The Almighty Lord assigned places to these objects in space, and to gain this end, the primordial gas or germ started breaking its continuity and consistency, thereby dividing into nebulous masses. The space was ordered to expand and to provide in its vastness places for this expanding nebulous mass. This stupendous mass of fluid was swirling and sweeping, and the shaking conglomeration was in an extremely disturbed and turbulent state. In it, huge waves, millions of miles high, were rising. The force of spontaneous expansion was acting. The most powerful stormy wind was rolling, rotating, shaking, drifting, sweeping, and forcing this fluid mass into outer regions of the space. At this stage, the force of expansion received the order to reverse to the system of condensation. All this time, the enormous velocity of expansion was kept under perfect control. He then bound the whole system within limits. At this juncture, Allah brought into existence a third force, resembling a highly strong wind. It stopped further thinning of the fluid realm and forced it back towards the center of the gravitation. Therefore, tremendous disturbances were raised in its body. This third force began acting upon it, creating fresh waves and forming fresh eddies, like curd being converted into thin buttermilk and thick small globules of butter. This wind, the third force, was acting very strongly in diverse ways. On the one hand, it turned the whole body of matter and energy in such a way that every part of it was equally and uniformly under its influence, till the realm took up the form of something resembling foam and froth, which formed islands of thicker matter in the sea of thinner matter. Each foam and eddy was a galaxy. Thus the Lord created galactic clusters, 7 skies, one beyond the other. The lowest cluster was to act as a base or center from which expansion was developed in all directions, and others, galactic clusters, looking like roofs, one over the other. The galaxies were, and are still today, floating in space without any support, occupying their places without any prop. He then allowed each galaxy to be adorned with its luminous suns or stars, planets reflecting lights of suns, and satellites, moons, while every one of them, stars and satellites, was decreed to rotate on its orbit within the limits of the constantly rotating roof galaxy. After having opened up the space, Allah filled it with different kinds of angels. Some of them, since their creation, have engaged themselves in prostration and have not got and will not get a chance to rise to the bowing posture, ruku. Some are bowing and will never stand up, while there are some who are standing in a file worshipping and will never leave their places or move. Some are constantly glorifying Him since their creation and will continue it without a break to the end of their existence. They never get tired, nor the constant work annoys them. All angels are so created that exhaustion and fatigue do not betake them, and oversight, negligence, or forgetfulness do not affect them. Some of them are trustees of His revelation and act as messengers carrying His commandments to His prophets and apostles. Some of them are guardians of His creatures, while others are guards of paradise. Some are so created that they extend from one part of the space to the other, even reaching beyond the limits of space. The grandeur of His might and glory has dazzled them, and realization of their own humility and meekness overpowers them. His might and power screens them from the eyes of His other creatures. Having realized His greatness, they do not associate Him with any form, figure, appearance, shape, or size. Neither do they ascribe attributes of His creatures to Him, nor confine Him to a place or position, nor compare or liken Him to anything. Some commentators consider the following sermon to be Sermon 2. Allah then gathered together earth having various properties, hard, soft, saline, acidic, etc., having different colors and humus. He moistened it and allowed it to ferment till it became one cohesive mass and took up a form, perhaps amino acid. He then allowed this shapeless mass having to take up a shape, various twists and curves in its body, and many limbs, joints, and segments. He then allowed this figure to remain for a period known to Him, till its central structure of bones started getting solidified and became solid and strong enough to support the whole figure and to bear its weight. It continued like that for a period of time, and then He infused into it the divine spirit, and the figure stood up as a man. This creation was an intelligent and rational being, using intellect instead of instinct, and having complete control of mental faculties and full command over his limbs. He further had natural sagacity and wisdom to differentiate between right and wrong, between truth and falsehood, and between justice and injustice. And he could distinguish between various tastes, colors, smells, as well as between different species of things, plants, and animals around him. This creature, man, had a body constituted and composed of substances having contradictory, conflicting, and divergent properties, as well as compatible, agreeing and harmonious qualities, having intrinsic heat and cold, and latent humidity and dryness. Having created and perfected such a being, He ordained the angels to hand over the trust committed to their care, and to fulfill the promise they had made, which was to accept His superiority and to recognize His greatness. He therefore ordered them all to pay their homage to him and to bow down before him. They all obeyed his command, except the Satan, who had a prejudice against Adam, and his bigotry led him to rebel against his orders and to behave impudently. He was arrogant of his origin of fire and humiliated Adam upon his origin of clay. Wrath of Allah be upon him, and he was given time till the day of judgment. Allah then allowed Adam to live in a place where he could pass his time happily, free from every kind of sorrow and grief. Adam was fully warned of Satan's enmity with him and his evil intentions against him. When the Satan saw Adam living in such a happy surrounding and having such a good company, he again felt jealous of him and allured him out of his place, position and status. Unfortunately, Adam could not see through the deception and changed the firm belief which he ought to have in the advice of Allah to doubt in the usefulness of this advice, that Satan is jealous of him and will harm him. And instead of a strong courage to act in obedience to the advice and according to his conviction, he faltered and fell into the trap. He thus changed his happy and carefree condition into that of uncertainty, fear, disappointment, and shame. After his first lapse, Adam felt ashamed of his weakness and repented. Allah, the Merciful, accepted his penitence and taught him the way to seek his forgiveness, favor, and grace, and promised to take him back to paradise. But for the time being, he sent him to the place where he had to strive for his living, a place where he could have children and his race could multiply. Allah selected his prophets from the descendants of Adam, took covenants from them to faithfully act according to his revelations and to propagate his message. The system of appointing messengers and prophets was adopted when many people broke their covenant given to Allah and went back upon their words, forgot their duties and divine rights, began accepting others as their gods, and started worshipping them because Satan had induced them to give up the ways of Allah and to forsake his worship. Allah sent his prophets continuously, one after the other, so that they might remind human beings of the duties which nature had laid upon them as a part of the plan of their existence and as the fulfillment of the promises made by their spirits on the day of creation. These prophets were to draw the attention of humanity towards the inherent covenant and the blessings and bounties bestowed upon them by him, to convey his messages to them, to teach them, to wisely use the treasures hidden in their minds and intellects, and also to direct them to understand the manifestations as well as the secrets of nature, such as the high roof over their heads, the sky, which protects them from destructive and devastating effects of the space, the land spread under their feet, with all its treasures and bounties, the ways and means of their subsistence and civilization, so abundantly and profusely provided, the diseases which weaken them, the misfortunes and calamities which often befall them, and lastly the death, which brings an end to everything. Allah, the Almighty, has never left his creation without guidance and education through his prophets, without a divine book, without conclusive and effective proof, and without a clear path to salvation. His prophets were men of such strength of character and courage that though they were often in minority, and those who opposed them always had the majority, yet they never felt nervous, disappointed or baffled, and never forsook their missions. None of them left this world without indicating and pointing out the one who was to take up his place after his demise and carry the divine mission. Thus every one of them was predicted by the prophet who passed away before him, and in turn was testified by him. Therefore it was not difficult for human beings to recognize the true prophet and distinguish him from a pretender. Thus ages succeeded ages, till Allah desired to bring the teachings of his religion to the final stage of perfection. And as he had promised in the beginning, he appointed the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him and his progeny, as his last prophet. He had made every one of his prophets to accept the prophethood and greatness of this chosen messenger and to appoint his time and mission, and they had fulfilled their promises. The signs and indications of his birth and delegation of divine mission to him were very clear and prominent, and the place where he was born was very august and auspicious. When he was entrusted with the divine mission, at that time people were following different creeds, were divided into numerous sects, and had multitudinous schools of thought. These diverse creeds and religions were mostly divided into three main classes. Some of them compared Allah to his creatures and thus tried to personify him. Some others tried to impart his attributes to others and thus gave way to infidelity, while others had no faith in his attributes or his being. Through our Holy Prophet, Allah made these people check their ways of thought and worship, and he thus wished to bring them out of their ignorance. Allah decided to call back Muhammad, peace be upon him and his progeny, to the sublime vicinity of his glory and bestowed upon him his highest favor and blessings. He concluded that the life in this world was no more worthy of his beloved Prophet, so he made him turn his face towards himself and raised him with adequate honor and deserving welcome from the irksome environment and distressing atmosphere to the transcendent eminence of his vicinity. The Holy Prophet, while departing from this world, left amongst you the same things as were left by the preceding prophets amongst their followers, because none of them ever left this world without leaving behind him a clear and intelligible set of directions and a prominent, easily recognizable and lasting emblem. In the same way, our Holy Prophet left the Holy Quran with you. He not only left this divine book, but he had during his lifetime fully explained all which this book declared lawful and legitimate or unlawful and prohibitory for you, which act was obligatory and which act was desirable, which of the orders or interdictions remain in force and which were repealed, where no exemption and leniency was to be tolerated, and where the merciful Allah had allowed indulgence and leniency, where there were the commands which pertain to particular occasions of persons, and those which were general for all times, places and persons, the warnings given, the examples cited, the maxims, the precepts, the aphorisms and the truisms repeated, the instructions which were precise and clear, and those which were complicated and difficult to understand. All this he explained to you, commenting, interpreting, and explaining every ambiguous passage and clearing impiled subtleties and significances. In the holy book Quran, there are certain portions whose knowledge and understanding is made imperative to every Muslim, and there are certain others which are such that their full understanding is not made obligatory to all, but it is optional. Few orders in it appear incumbent according to the text of the book, but the traditions of the Holy Prophet have explained them to be repealed later on. Conversely, certain orders originally enforced through the traditions were afterwards revoked through this book. Certain injunctions pertain to certain times but not universal and not obligatory in changed circumstances, environments and times. This book has clearly differentiated between several interdictions and prohibitory commands. There are unpardonable and mortal sins, which are fatal to the soul and salvation, and the penalty for them is hell, while there are minor sins and lapses which may be pardoned. In the same way, there are certain other deeds whose part also is acceptable, and men are at liberty to widen the scope, field, and extent of these deeds. Sermon 3. About Hajj, the holy pilgrimage to Mecca. Allah has made the pilgrimage to His sacred house obligatory upon you. It is a house which He had destined to be an altar and a place of veneration and worship for all human beings. People gather around it to satisfy their longing for visiting it, as thirsty animals gather around a watering place to satiate their thirst, and as pigeons fly towards their nests. People assemble at this house of Allah to refresh their faith, obtain hope and peace of mind, and to find a refuge from sins and vices. Allah, glory be to Him, has made Hajj an institution to judge the submission of human mind towards His might, and a sign of their belief and respect to His greatness. He selected from among His creations those who listen to His commands and obey them, who testify to His orders and come to stand at places where His prophets have stood before them. In going round the Kaaba, they resemble the angels who fly round His divine throne. In this divine trade, they are securing benefits of performing His worship and hastening towards the promised land of forgiveness and blessings. The glorious and almighty Allah has made this house an emblem of Islam, a place where people can find rest, peace and hope. He had made Hajj obligatory and its pilgrimage incumbent upon you. He says, for those who have the means and ability, pilgrimage is an obligation laid down by Allah. The disbelievers should know that Allah is independent of His creatures. Surah Ali Imran. Sermon 4. Imam Ali delivered this sermon on his return from the Battle of Siffin. In it, the Imam has explained the condition of Arabs in pre-Islamic days and the corrupt condition in which Islamic society had fallen again. Glorifying Him, I seek the completion of His blessings, submitting with the willingness and obedience before His glory and majesty, and avoiding sins and vices. I thank Allah for His blessings. I seek His help in poverty and distress, which may suffice. Whom He guides will never be misled. One who disobeys Him will never attain salvation, and whomever He helps will never be confused or confounded. Verily, no one deserves thanks so much as He, and nobody can repay such thanks so beneficently and so bounteously as He. I testify and declare that there is no God but Allah, and He has no partner. The sincerity of this declaration and of my faith is tested, and the earnestness of my belief is beyond doubt. I shall hold this belief throughout my life, and I shall treasure it against dangerous times and dreadful places, because such a declaration is stronghold of one's faith, is the source of attainment of His pleasure, and is the best kind of repulse to the Satan. I testify that Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the servant of Allah and also His prophet, whom He has entrusted with His distinguished religion, with His recorded commandments, with His revealed and manifest book, the Holy Quran, and with specific and clear commands and interdictions, so that minds may be clear of heathenish, superstition, traditions and taboos, so that doubts about truth and justice of the teachings of Islam be removed, so that people may be trained to accept rational and logical proofs of the eminence of His preachings, and people may take warnings from the verses of the Holy Quran and lessons from the lives of wicked people. When the Holy Prophet first started preaching Islam, society was in such a corrupt state that no true form of religion was followed. Convictions and beliefs about truth and justice were disrespected. Basic principles of life had become very divergent. Commands of Allah were set at naught. A way out of this vicious chaos seemed impossible, and the road to the realm of Allah appeared closed. Conditions now have taken a similar turn. Teachings of the true religion are forgotten. Blind faith is the order of the day. Commands of Allah are disobeyed. The Satan is appreciated, and religion is ignored in such a way that its tenets are falling apart. Its dogmas are being altered. Its precepts are being effaced and eclipsed, and its paths are being obliterated. Satan is being obeyed. His ways are being followed, and he is filling their minds with vicious ideas. These ideas have become his army and are raising his standard to promote vicious and sinful disorders. The slaves of Satan in their turn have become masters of the situation, crushing the society, subjugating everybody, and holding the realm under its sway. The masses, being uneducated, have fallen easy prey to him and are now standing confused. Such is the condition of the best realm of the world, which is now populated with wicked persons who waste their time and weep over the losses. It is a realm where the learned have to keep their mouths shut and the uneducated and ignorance rule. Sermon 5.
In praise of Ahlul-Bayt, the progeny of the Holy Prophet, some commentators consider this as a part of the previous sermon.
The Almighty Allah has bestowed His trust
On Ali Muhammad, the descendants of Muhammad, peace be upon them, who are the strongholds of His commandments, from where they are expounded and interpreted.
They are the fountainheads of knowledge created by Him, shelters for His teachings, forts for heavenly books, and lofty citadels to defend His religion. Islam in its beginning needed help and support. By them, Allah made Islam strong and powerful. Sermon 6. What kinds of people were hypocrites? Some commentators consider this as a part of Sermon 4 and 5. They sowed the seeds of sins and vices, watered them with vanity, deception and deceit, and then they harvested deception and destruction. None of the followers of the Holy Prophet could be compared with Ali Muhammad, peace of Allah be on him and his descendants, and none should be considered equal to them. There can be no resemblance between those who distribute bounties and those who receive them. Ahlul-Bayt are basis of religion and pillars of faith. To them both the extreme fanatics as well as strugglers in the path of truth and religion can approach for guidance and salvation. They are efficiently capable and fit for the place and privilege of leadership and caliphate. They have been and are even now rightful heirs of the Holy Prophet who had entrusted them imamate. The caliphate has now come back to its right place and has reached the position assigned to it by the heaven. Sermon 7. This is the famous sermon of Shiqshaqiyah. It is so named because while Imam Ali was delivering it, an Iraqi got up and presented a letter to him. He got busy in reading it. When he had finished the letter, Abdullah bin Abbas requested him to continue his sermon. The Imam replied, Ibn Abbas, this speech of mine was extempore and was being delivered at the impulse of that moment, like the Shiqshaqiyah, the roar of a camel. It can't be continued. So far as the subject is concerned, the sermon is self-explanatory. By Allah, that man Abu Bakr snatched the caliphate as if it was an insignia which could be put on by him, though he knew very well that I was as indispensable to the caliphate as the pivot to the grindstone upon which its revolvings depend. The eminence of my position among those men was such that I was like a fountain head from which wisdom flowed, and nobody could aspire to rise to the heights of my knowledge. But I was forced to bear this usurpation and turn my face away from the calamity. I was in serious straits. There were two alternatives before me: either to fight for my rights without the help of supporters, or to patiently endure the bereavement. The endurance was going to be of such a sad and long duration that during this period young men would become old, the old would lose their vitalities, and the faithful would end their days unsuccessfully trying to improve the situation. After thoughtful consideration, I came to the conclusion that the wisest course for me was to face the disaster with patience and courage. I therefore bore it all patiently, though the very thought of usurpation of my just right was extremely painful and saddening to me. At last the first caliph died, but while passing away, he appointed someone else as the caliph. Here Imam Ali cited a verse of the poet, in which the poet Asha Hamdani draws a comparison between the days when he was leading with his brother a happy and carefree life, and again when he had to face difficulties alone. Is it not astonishing that during his lifetime the first caliph was always badly in need of the help of others to compensate for his imperfections and defects and to cover his faults and failures, but at the time of his death he thought himself to be wise and learned enough to fix and appoint somebody to carry on the duties at which
he was a complete failure himself.
Boldly and unscrupulously, he and his successor, in his turn, pillaged and plundered the wealth of the community, leaving the state in such a sadly injured condition that the passage of time was increasing the intensity of the injury. It was almost impossible to undo the harm, and the danger of further repetition of the unscrupulous exploitations was apparent. But it was carried on under the guise of law and order, and many lame excuses were offered to justify those irreligious and unholy arrogations, and many more were repeated later.
Thus the situation was brought to such a pitch that whosoever took up the reins of the state
or caliphate was in the unhappy predicament of riding an untrained and refractory she-camel. If desiring to keep the animal under control, he had pulled the bridle hard, he would slit and wound its nostrils, and if he had allowed it a free run, the animal would rush itself and its rider to destruction. I swear by Allah that people were misled and they went astray. They missed the straight path of religion, but accepting the inevitable without reproving and with resignation, I bore the long and painful period of the devastation of human rights and religion, till the second person also died. But before his death, he left the question of the caliphate to the decision of a committee, and he thought that I could also be on the panel of that committee, because he had himself nominated me. O Allah, what had I to do with this select committee? I had nothing common with any of its members. Did I ever have a doubt about my preeminence and superiority when compared to the first, that I would accept to be one of the body of persons far inferior to him? But in the interest of humanity and religion, I agreed to be a member of this select committee. I had to adjust myself to their level, to demand my just rights of them, as I had done at the time of those who were superior to them. One of the members of this committee turned against me because of his hatred. By this the Imam meant either Saad or Talha. The other, Abdurrahman bin Auf, had also got inclined the other way due to very obvious reason of kinship, besides a few other reasons which the world came to know later. He was brother-in-law of Caliph Uthman. Consequently, the third proudly took charge of the caliphate, as if it was a private grazing ground, and with bloated stomachs he and members of his clan Bani Umayyah started plundering the wealth of the Muslim world in the same recklessly gluttonous manner as characterizes a camel when it devours harvest grass. However, this man met an untimely death. The greed of his clan was the cause of his fateful end. After his death, people flocked around me, imploring me to take up the caliphate. They gathered in such numbers and were so anxious to show their sincerity that both of my sons, Hassan and Hussein, were almost trampled and my dress was torn. They were simply falling upon me to accept their rulership and leadership. I would have turned down their request, but I was afraid that with my refusal they would completely become out of touch with truth and religion. When I accepted their rulership and made them follow the path of Allah, that is, the same path as the Holy Prophet, peace of Allah be upon him, and his descendants, taught them to follow, they revolted. One party, al-Mu'mineen Aisha, broke the oath of allegiance. The second party, Kharjiites, became apostates, and the third adopted an equally wrong course, and coveting the power and wealth which are part of such a rulership, they started tyrannizing the people and oppressing them into subjugation. All the three groups behaved as if they had never heard the Holy Quran saying, "Paradise is meant for those who neither create mischief, nor do they oppress human beings. The eternal peace and happiness is for those who lead a pious life." Surah Al-Qasas. I swear by Allah that they were made to hear these words of Allah repeatedly, and their meanings were clearly explained to them. But the vicious ways of life fascinated them, and its luxuries, its pomp and show, as well as its power and wealth enchanted them. I swear by the Creator of this universe that had they not sworn unconditional allegiance to me, had they not manifested profound gratitude in my accepting their rulership, had not the presence of helpers and supporters made it incumbent upon me to defend the faith, and had Allah, the Almighty, not taken a promise from the learned to put a check upon the luxurious and vicious lives of oppressors and tyrants, as well as to try to reduce the pangs of poverty and starvation of the oppressed and downtrodden, and had he not made it incumbent upon them to secure back the usurped rights of the weak from the mighty and powerful oppressors, I would even then have left the rulership of this state, as I did earlier, and would have allowed it to sink into anarchy and chaos. Then you would have seen that in my view the glamour of a vicious life of your world is no better than the sneezing of a goat. Sermon 8. In this sermon, Imam Ali has depicted the mentality of Quraysh and what Ahlul Bayt have done to teach them Islam and to reform their minds. He finished it with an advice to them to accept religion sincerely. We, Ahlul Bayt, guided you from the abyss of ignorance and infidelity towards the horizon of knowledge and religion. We raised the standard of your life and behavior. Through us you saw the light of truth and wisdom, and came out of the dark alleys of paganism and depravity. Those ears be better deaf which do not care to listen to good advice, and do not wish to be warned of the evil consequences of a vicious life. How could my humble and subdued voice induce such people to pay heed to truth, justice, and religion, when the strongly worded commands of Allah and His Prophet did not make them attentive? May Allah grant strength, boldness, and stability to persons who are afraid of nothing but His might. And you, Quraysh, so far as you are concerned, I always accepted deceit, duplicity, and hypocrisy from you, and awaited for the same. I always noticed in you treachery and knavery. I was not harsh with you because of your outward show of Islam, while you were under the wrong impression that you could deceive me. But my sincere love of truth and justice has always kept me warned of your treacheries and frauds. Remember, who forsakes me and who does not obey me is on the wrong track. I never doubted the obligations laid upon me and the rights and privileges due to me from the time they were revealed to me. You know, Prophet Moses was never afraid of death. What he really feared was ascendancy of wealth, power, and ignorance over truth and justice. Similar is my case. Death does not frighten me. It never did. What I am afraid of is that you do not realize that you are standing on the crossroads of truth and untruth. Remember, those who sincerely accept religion will never be disappointed. Sermon 9. After the death of the Holy Prophet, when Abbas, uncle of the Holy Prophet, and Abu Sufyan came to Imam Ali to swear allegiance, he advised them in the following words. O people, when you see revolt and anarchism raging like storms, trying to find a way out of their injurious effects, avoid the ways of hatred and malice, and do not let superiority complex drive you towards a class war. Remember, only those who have followers and helpers can achieve success. Others should not vie for power and supremacy. It is the safest course for them. This rulership is like dirty water, not fit for consumption. It is like a morsel which chokes the person trying to swallow it. Any struggle at this stage is as foolish as picking raw fruits or trying to cultivate barren land. I was put in a dilemma. If I declare my just claims, people will start saying that I have become avaricious and greedy for power and wealth. And if I sit quiet, they will say that I have grown weak and timid, and that fear of death is restraining me from asserting my just rights. Alas, do they not realize that I have never been afraid of death? I have faced it so often and have passed through so many phases of dangers and perils. I swear by Allah that Abu Talib's son Ali is as fond of death as a suckling baby is fond of its mother's breast. Death does not frighten me from claiming my rights. But there are such deep secrets and hidden knowledge as has been revealed and entrusted to me, that if you know them, you will tremble like a rope hanging in a deep well. Sermon 10. When Talha and Zubair rebelled against Imam Ali, and by raising an army tried to take possession of the province of Basra and Kufa, the Imam resolved to fight against them to put down the rebellion. Some people, exaggerating the might and forces of the rebels, tried to dissuade the Imam against this decision. This speech was delivered by the Imam in reply to their dissuasion. I swear by Allah that I will not sit quiet and will not allow these people to do as they like. I will not act like the hunted beast, which is lulled and fooled by its hunter and falls an easy prey to his tricks and devices. But with the help of believers in the truth and justice of Islam, I will try to suppress this revolt against Allah and religion. I declare that with assistance of my faithful followers, I will always fight against upholders of schism and hypocrisy and supporters of injustice and falsehood till I meet with my death. There is nothing new to me in this revolt. Since the passing away of the Holy Prophet, peace of Allah be upon him and his progeny, how often were my rights usurped, and unjust and unjustifiable precedence was given to others, till the situation has now been brought to such gravity that these unholy hordes have resolved to fight against me.